She married beauty, charm, and elegance. What she never told him was the price she was willing to pay to protect her secrets. Ethan Cole built his fortune from nothing. Born in a small apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, he grew up watching his mother clean other people's houses to keep food on the table. She would come home every night with sore hands and a tired smile, but she never once complained in front of her son. Ethan remembered the winters when the heater broke and his mother wrapped him in every blanket they owned, telling him stories about a future where he would never have to worry about money again. By the time he was 25, Ethan had already built and sold his first small software company. By 30, he had launched Cole Aerospace Technologies, a satellite communications company that would eventually be worth over $6 billion. By 35, his name appeared on business magazine covers next to words like self-made and visionary. But no matter how many zeros appeared in his bank account, Ethan never forgot the woman who raised him, or the values she instilled in him. That was why Maria Alvarez mattered so much to him. Maria had worked in the Cole household for over 20 years. She had been hired originally by Ethan's mother, back when the family lived in a modest 3-bedroom house outside Cleveland, long before the aerospace empire existed. When Ethan's mother passed away from cancer when he was 17, it was Maria who sat with him through the funeral arrangements, who cooked his meals when he forgot to eat, who drove 3 hours to visit him at college during his freshman year just to make sure he was doing all right. To the outside world, Maria was staff. To Ethan, she was family, the only family he had left, which was exactly the problem Vanessa Sinclair had never been able to solve. Vanessa was beautiful in the way runway models are beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, a voice like honey, dark hair that always seemed perfectly styled even on ordinary mornings. She had met Ethan 2 years earlier at a charity gala in Manhattan, wearing a red dress that turned every head in the room except, ironically, his, not at first. Ethan had been distracted that night, discussing quarterly earnings with his board members in a corner of the ballroom. It took Vanessa nearly an hour of strategic positioning before she finally introduced herself, offering a compliment about his company's recent satellite launch that she had clearly researched beforehand. It took her 3 more months of carefully engineered chance encounters, thoughtful gifts, and perfectly timed vulnerability to make Ethan fall for her completely. She learned his coffee order. She remembered his mother's birthday after he mentioned it only once. She cried softly during a movie about a father losing his daughter, knowing Ethan would notice her sensitivity and find it endearing. She was good. Very good. In public, Vanessa played the role of the devoted fiancée flawlessly. She held Ethan's arm at press events, always standing slightly behind him, never overshadowing his moment. She spoke softly to reporters about wanting a simple life filled with love, not luxury. She told one magazine that she and Ethan planned to have a small, intimate wedding, nothing extravagant, a quote that made her look humble and grounded to millions of readers. Behind closed doors, it was a different story entirely. You spent $200,000 on a hospital wing. For strangers. Vanessa had snapped at Ethan just last month, after he donated to a children's cancer center in Houston. They were standing in the kitchen of the Cole estate, and her voice had dropped into a sharp, cold tone that no camera had ever captured. Ethan, that money could have gone toward the Hamptons property renovation. We agreed on that budget in January. It's called charity, Vanessa, Ethan had replied, exhausted after a long flight. Kids are getting chemotherapy in outdated rooms. It's not a competition between that and a beach house. Vanessa hadn't argued further. She simply exhaled sharply, turned away, and busied herself with her phone. Ethan assumed the conversation was over. He didn't realize it was never really about the money for her. Not entirely. It was about control. Every dollar spent outside her influence felt to Vanessa like a small crack in her long-term plan. And Maria noticed everything. Maria had been suspicious of Vanessa from the very first dinner, nearly 2 years earlier. She remembered watching Vanessa graciously thank the kitchen staff in front of Ethan, only to complain bitterly about the help moments later when she thought no one important was listening. Maria noticed how Vanessa's assistant, a nervous young woman named Kelly, made frequent calls to luxury jewelers and private shopping consultants using Ethan's credit card. Purchases Ethan never seemed to review closely, trusting Vanessa's judgment completely. Maria also noticed the late-night phone calls. Nearly every Thursday evening when Ethan was occupied with international business calls, Vanessa would step onto the back terrace with her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice dropping into a tone completely unlike her public persona. Sharper, colder, businesslike in a way that had nothing to do with wedding planning. One rainy Tuesday evening in early spring, Maria was folding laundry near Vanessa's private study when she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. The study door was slightly open, and Vanessa's voice carried clearly into the hallway. "Relax. Ethan doesn't check the accounts. He trusts me completely," Vanessa said, laughing coldly at something the person on the other end had said. "Once we're married, everything transfers into a joint trust, and by the time he figures out what's missing, it'll already be long gone. We've done this before, Marcus. It always works." Maria's hands went completely still, a shirt half folded between her fingers. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away. She didn't say anything that night. She needed proof. Not gossip, not suspicion, but real, undeniable evidence. Because she knew if she went to Ethan with nothing but a whispered conversation overheard through a cracked door, Vanessa would simply deny it with practiced innocence, shed a few tears, and turn the accusation back onto Maria. A maid, however beloved, held no real power against a woman who had spent 2 years building an image of perfect devotion in Ethan's eyes. So Maria began watching. Quietly, carefully, patiently. She started keeping a small notebook hidden inside her sewing kit, jotting down dates, times, and strange phone numbers she glimpsed on Vanessa's phone screen when it was left unattended on the kitchen counter. She noted the names of unfamiliar men who occasionally visited the estate during the brief windows when Ethan traveled for business. Men who never stayed long and always left through the side entrance, avoiding the main security cameras near the front gate. She noticed documents left carelessly on Vanessa's desk one afternoon while dusting. Documents filled with financial terms Maria didn't fully understand, phrases like collateral transfer and trust restructuring, but which instinctively made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. 3 weeks into her quiet investigation, Maria found something that made her blood run cold. While vacuuming behind a bookshelf in Vanessa's private office, a task she rarely performed but had been asked to do that day due to a scheduling change, she noticed a slim folder wedged behind several decorative books, clearly hidden rather than misplaced. Inside were bank statements from an account Ethan had never mentioned, an account Maria was certain he didn't know existed. The numbers on the page made her hands tremble. Nearly $4 million, transferred gradually over the past year and a half from various Cole family business accounts into what appeared to be a private offshore holding. Maria's hands shook as she carefully photographed each page using her old flip phone, working quickly, glancing repeatedly toward the office door. Her heart hammering against her ribs with every click of the camera shutter. She knew in that moment, standing alone in that quiet office with evidence of deception in her trembling hands, that she was no longer simply a maid folding laundry and dusting shelves. She had become a witness, a threat to someone dangerous. And gold diggers, when they feel cornered and exposed, do not simply walk away quietly. They fight back and they fight dirty. That same week, almost as if her body sensed the danger before her mind fully processed it, Maria began feeling strangely unwell. Dizzy spells struck without warning while she climbed the stairs. A dull, persistent stomach pain settled into her abdomen after every meal. A heaviness pressed against her chest that made even simple tasks feel exhausting. She brushed it off initially as stress, perhaps a lingering flu, nothing more than her body reacting to sleepless nights spent worrying about what she'd discovered. She had no idea that her fatigue wasn't simply stress or exhaustion. She had no idea it was the beginning of something far more sinister, something being carefully, deliberately administered to her, one quiet cup of tea at a time. A collapse in the kitchen was just the beginning. No one yet knew that something far more sinister was already at work inside Maria's body. 2 weeks after discovering the hidden folder, Maria's condition worsened steadily, though she told no one. She didn't want to alarm the household staff, and she certainly didn't want Vanessa to sense that anything was wrong. Every morning she forced herself out of bed, put on a brave face, and continued her duties as though nothing had changed. Even as the dizzy spells grew more frequent and the stomach pain sharpened into something closer to constant discomfort. She had started cautiously, avoiding the evening tea Vanessa's assistant Kelly began bringing to the staff kitchen, as a thoughtful gesture a few weeks earlier. Something about the gesture had never quite sat right with Maria. Vanessa had never shown that kind of consideration toward the household staff before. But politely declining every single night would have looked suspicious, so occasionally, when she couldn't avoid it without drawing attention, she drank it anyway. It happened on a Thursday morning, in the estate's enormous marble kitchen, while Maria prepared breakfast for the household staff before Ethan's return from a business trip. She was reaching for a mixing bowl on the top shelf when her vision blurred violently, the room spinning around her in dizzying circles. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed hard onto the cold marble floor, the bowl shattering beside her. The head chef, a kind man named Antonio who had worked alongside Maria for nearly a decade, found her minutes later, unconscious, her skin pale and clammy, her breathing shallow and uneven. He screamed for help, and within minutes, the entire household staff had gathered around her, panic spreading through the kitchen. Ethan was in the middle of a business call in Chicago when his head housekeeper, Diane, phoned him, her voice trembling with fear. "Mr. Cole, it's Maria. She collapsed. We've called an ambulance, but you need to come home immediately." Ethan didn't hesitate for even a second. He ended the call mid-sentence with his board members, left his laptop open on the conference table, and told his assistant to cancel every meeting for the rest of the week. Within the hour, he was aboard his private jet, staring out the window at the clouds below. His mind racing through every possible explanation, none of them good enough to calm the fear building in his chest. "Get her to Mount Sinai," he told his driver the moment he landed at the airport. "The best doctors available. Whatever it costs, I don't care." By the time Ethan arrived at the hospital, Maria was stable but weak, hooked up to monitors, an oxygen tube resting gently beneath her nose, and 4-line delivering fluids into her frail arm. Ethan rushed to her bedside, taking her hand in both of his. His eyes brimming with tears he refused to let fall in front of her. "I'm here now," he whispered. "You're not alone." Maria managed a weak smile despite her exhaustion. "You didn't have to drop everything, Mijo. You raised me," Ethan said simply. "There was never a version of this where I wouldn't come." Dr. James Whitfield, the attending physician assigned to Maria's case, entered the room a short while later carrying a tablet filled with preliminary test results. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with tired eyes that suggested long hospital shifts and even longer nights spent worrying about patients he couldn't quite figure out. "Mr. Cole," Dr. Whitfield said, pulling Ethan aside near the doorway. "Her blood work shows some unusual markers. Elevated toxins in her system, along with irregular kidney function. This doesn't quite match ordinary exhaustion or a simple flu, which was our first assumption when she arrived." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "What does that mean exactly?" "We're not entirely certain yet," Dr. Whitfield admitted honestly. "It could be environmental exposure. It could be something she ingested, accidentally or otherwise. We're running a full toxicology screen, but those results typically take several days to come back with full accuracy. In the meantime, we need to keep her under close observation." "Ingested? You mean someone could have given her something?" Ethan asked, his voice tightening with disbelief. "It's one possibility among several," Dr. Whitfield said carefully. choosing his words with deliberate caution. I don't want to speculate before we have concrete evidence. But given the specific combination of symptoms, it's not something I can rule out. Ethan returned to Maria's bedside that first night and sat with her for hours, holding her frail hand, the same hand that had wiped his tears when he was a grieving 17-year-old boy standing beside his mother's casket. You're going to be okay, he whispered softly, more to reassure himself than her. Whatever this is, we're going to fix it. I promise you that. Maria drifted in and out of sleep throughout the night, occasionally squeezing his hand weakly to let him know she could still hear him. Ethan barely slept at all, his mind circling endlessly around Dr. Whitfield's words, something she ingested, accidentally or otherwise. Vanessa arrived at the hospital the following morning, dressed elegantly in a soft cream-colored coat, carrying an enormous bouquet of white lilies perfectly arranged for maximum visual impact, the kind of gesture that photographed beautifully for any reporters who might catch wind of the story. She found Ethan in the hallway outside Maria's room, exhaustion etched deeply into his face. How is she? Vanessa asked softly, wrapping her arms around him in a tight, comforting embrace. Not good, Ethan admitted, his voice breaking slightly as he returned the hug, grateful for what he believed was genuine support. They're running more tests. Dr. Whitfield mentioned possible poisoning. I don't understand how something like this could happen to her. Something flickered behind Vanessa's eyes in that brief moment. Fear, quickly masked and buried beneath practiced concern. It was so fleeting that Ethan, exhausted and consumed by worry, didn't notice it at all. But a nurse walking past them in the hallway did notice it, pausing for just a fraction of a second before continuing on her rounds, filing the strange expression away in the back of her mind without quite understanding why it unsettled her. Because Vanessa knew, with absolute sickening certainty, exactly why Maria was lying in that hospital bed. And she knew that the walls she had spent 2 years carefully constructing around her secrets were beginning, ever so slightly, to crack. Every poison needs a plan. And Vanessa Sinclair's plan was falling apart faster than she ever imagined. 3 days before Maria's collapse, Vanessa had made a decision she knew, even in the moment, could not be undone. It began the evening she discovered, through a frantic, hushed conversation with her assistant Kelly, that someone had been photographing documents in her private office. Kelly had noticed the office slightly disturbed, a folder shifted from its hiding place behind the bookshelf, and immediately reported it to Vanessa, terrified of the consequences if she hadn't. Vanessa's blood had run cold. She reviewed the household staff roster in her mind, narrowing down who could possibly have had access to that specific office during that specific window of time. Maria's name kept surfacing again and again, as the only person with a legitimate reason to be dusting bookshelves in a room she rarely entered. Vanessa couldn't be certain, not entirely. But certainty had never stopped her before when instinct told her to act decisively. That same night, she visited the estate's small staff kitchen under the pretense of thanking the household team for their hard work, an uncharacteristic gesture that immediately struck several staff members as odd, though none dared question their employer's fiancé. She personally arranged for a special evening tea to be delivered to the staff quarters each night, insisting it was a small thank you for their dedication. Hidden within that tea, in carefully measured doses too small to cause immediate alarm, was a common prescription sedative Vanessa had obtained months earlier under false pretenses from a private clinic in Miami. Leftover medication from her carefully hidden previous marriage, medication she'd kept, almost instinctively, as a form of insurance against exactly this kind of situation. It wasn't supposed to be lethal. Vanessa told herself that repeatedly, late at night, staring at the ceiling unable to sleep. It was simply supposed to make Maria weak, confused, hospitalized long enough for Vanessa to erase every trace of the hidden bank statements, replace the folder with something innocuous, and quietly, permanently silence Maria's suspicions through carefully worded threats once she recovered enough to be reasoned with. It was supposed to be simple, contained, controllable. But Maria's blood pressure medication, something Vanessa hadn't accounted for, interacted dangerously with the sedative, amplifying its effects far beyond what Vanessa had anticipated. Instead of mild weakness, Maria's body had begun shutting down in ways that terrified even the experienced medical staff at Mount Sinai. Now, standing in the hospital hallway, watching doctors move urgently in and out of Maria's room, Vanessa realized with rising panic that her plan had spiraled dangerously out of her control. She needed a new plan immediately, one that would buy her enough time to finish covering her tracks before Ethan or the doctors uncovered the truth. That evening, while Ethan stepped away briefly to take an urgent business call from his company's board of directors, Vanessa approached Dr. Whitfield near the nurse's station, her heels clicking softly against the polished hospital floor. "Doctor, could I speak with you privately for just a moment?" she asked, her voice gentle, practiced, disarming in exactly the way that had worked flawlessly on dozens of people before him. Dr. Whitfield hesitated, glancing toward Maria's room, but nodded politely. "Of course, Ms. Sinclair." They stepped into a small supply room down the hall, shelves lined with gauze, syringes, and medical equipment. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly, though her voice remained remarkably composed. "I know this might sound unusual," she began carefully, choosing each word with deliberate precision, "but Maria has a complicated history with our family. Financial disputes that go back quite a while. I think it would be better, for everyone involved including Ethan, if her treatment moved a little slower than usual. Just until certain matters between us are properly settled." Dr. Whitfield's brow furrowed with genuine confusion. "Ms. Sinclair, I'm not entirely sure I understand what exactly you're asking of me." Vanessa reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a thick envelope filled with crisp, unmarked cash. $50,000, she said quietly, holding it out toward him. "Consider it a token of appreciation for your discretion. Delay the toxicology results a few days. Slow her recovery process just slightly. It's such a small thing, really, in the grand scheme." Dr. Whitfield stared at the money, his mind racing through a complicated tangle of emotions. Shock, disgust, and buried somewhere beneath both, a flicker of dangerous temptation he wasn't proud of. He had substantial medical school debt still hanging over him, years away from being paid off. His daughter was starting college in the fall, and tuition costs had climbed far higher than he'd anticipated when he first began saving. For one brief, dangerous moment, staring at that envelope, Dr. Whitfield genuinely hesitated. And that hesitation was exactly the moment Ethan Cole, returning from his business call and searching for Vanessa, walked past the supply room's slightly open door, and stopped cold, frozen in place. He saw the money extended in Vanessa's outstretched hand. He saw Dr. Whitfield's uncertain expression, caught between refusal and temptation. He saw the sudden, unmistakable panic that flashed across Vanessa's face the instant she noticed him standing there in the doorway, witnessing everything. His entire body went numb, a cold, sinking dread spreading through his chest as pieces he hadn't allowed himself to fully examine began, painfully, to connect. "Vanessa," Ethan said quietly, his voice dangerously calm in a way that unsettled her far more than shouting ever could have. "What exactly is this?" For the first time in 2 years, Vanessa Sinclair had absolutely no lie prepared. And the silence that followed would change everything. Time seemed to freeze completely in that narrow supply room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead the only sound breaking the tense silence. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed again, no words emerging despite the desperate calculations racing behind her eyes. Dr. Whitfield quietly stepped back, setting the envelope down on a nearby metal shelf, as though physically distancing himself from it might somehow undo the last several minutes. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," Vanessa finally managed, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound composed. "Then tell me exactly what it looks like," Ethan said, stepping fully into the cramped room, his eyes moving slowly between her face and the money resting on the shelf. "Because from where I'm standing, my fiancé just tried to bribe my family's doctor." I was trying to help. Help who? Ethan's voice rose sharply, louder than he intended, echoing off the sterile walls. Help Maria. By slowing down her treatment. By keeping vital information from me while she's lying in a hospital bed. Vanessa's carefully maintained composure finally began to crack at the edges. You don't understand the full situation, Ethan. There are things happening that you're not aware of. Then make me understand, he shouted, frustration and fear colliding violently in his chest. Because right now, all I understand is that I just caught you paying off a doctor while a woman who practically raised me might have been poisoned. The word hung heavily in the air between them, suffocating. Poison. Ethan's mind raced backward through the past several weeks, connecting fragments he hadn't allowed himself to fully consider until this exact moment. Vanessa's strange new gesture of nightly staff tea. Her uncharacteristic kindness toward household employees she'd previously dismissed entirely, the flicker of fear he'd glimpsed but ignored in the hospital hallway just yesterday. He looked at Vanessa, truly looked at her perhaps for the first time in 2 years. And for one devastating moment, he saw entirely past the beautiful, carefully constructed mask she had perfected. Did you do something to her? Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible, almost afraid of the answer waiting on the other side of that question. Ethan, please, just listen to me for one moment. Did you poison Maria? He demanded again, louder this time, unwilling to let her deflect any further. The silence that followed was, in itself, an answer far more damning than any words could have been. Dr. Whitfield, unable to bear the crushing weight of what he'd almost participated in moments earlier, finally found his voice, cutting through the unbearable tension. Mr. Cole, he said quietly, I think you need to see something. He retrieved his tablet from his coat pocket and pulled up a partial laboratory report he'd been quietly holding back from full disclosure while Vanessa's proposal had been dangling in front of him, the very result she had been desperately trying to delay. The toxicology screen revealed trace amounts of a common prescription sedative, present in Maria's bloodstream in small but repeated doses, not immediately lethal on its own, but extraordinarily dangerous when combined with Maria's existing blood pressure medication over several consecutive days. Someone administered this to her deliberately, Dr. Whitfield explained. His voice steady despite the gravity of what he was revealing. Multiple times, over an extended period. This isn't the kind of thing that happens by accident, Mr. Cole. Someone did this intentionally. Ethan turned back toward Vanessa, his entire body trembling now with a violent, overwhelming mixture of grief, betrayal, and a rage he had never before experienced in his entire life. Why, Vanessa? He demanded, his voice breaking. Why would you hurt her? What did Maria ever do to deserve this from you? Tears filled Vanessa's eyes then, but for perhaps the first time in years, they weren't calculated performance tears designed for maximum sympathetic effect. They were the raw, genuine tears of someone who had finally, completely run out of road, out of lies, out of clever explanations. She found out, Vanessa whispered, her voice hollow. She found out about the accounts. About the money I've been moving out of your business for months. About everything, Ethan. What money? Ethan demanded, his voice rising again. What accounts are you talking about? Vanessa's shoulders sagged completely, the fight visibly draining out of her body all at once. There's a trust fund, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper now. One I set up using your business accounts as collateral over the past year and a half. Nearly $4 million, Ethan. I was going to pay it all back before the wedding, I swear to you. I just needed time, and then Maria found the documents, and I panicked completely. You stole from me, Ethan said, his voice hollow with disbelief. You've been systematically stealing from me for over a year. And when Maria discovered the truth, you poisoned her to keep her quiet. I never meant for her to get this sick, Vanessa cried, genuine desperation breaking through her voice now. I just needed time to fix everything before anyone found out. Panicked Ethan. I made a horrible mistake. Ethan stared at the woman he had planned to spend the rest of his life with, the woman he had trusted completely with his heart, his home, and his entire future, and felt something inside his chest break apart completely, irreparably. What would you do? It feels almost necessary to ask in this moment. If you discovered the person you loved most had done something this unforgivable, simply to protect their own lives. Hospital security arrived within minutes, summoned by concerned staff who had overheard the escalating commotion from the hallway. Vanessa was escorted firmly out of the supply room, still pleading, still desperately trying to explain herself, while Ethan remained frozen in place beside Maria's hospital room door, staring through the small observation window at the frail woman who had given him more genuine, unconditional love in 20 years than Vanessa had offered him in 2 entire years together. The truth was finally out in the open. But for Ethan Cole, the hardest part of this nightmare was only just beginning. That night, as hospital security detained Vanessa in a private administrative office while awaiting police arrival, detectives began taking preliminary statements from Dr. Whitfield, hospital staff, and eventually Ethan himself. The entire wing buzzed with quiet, urgent activity, nurses whispering among themselves, security guards standing watchfully near the elevators. Ethan sat alone in a small waiting room down the hall, his head buried in his hands, replaying every moment of the past 2 years in his mind, searching desperately for signs he should have caught, warnings he had carelessly dismissed. He remembered Maria's gentle warning months earlier, during a quiet evening when Vanessa had gone out with friends. "Something about her feels off to me, Mijo," Maria had said carefully, choosing her words with the caution of someone who knew her opinion carried little weight against a billionaire's romantic decisions. "I can't explain it exactly. Just be careful." Ethan had gently brushed off her concern at the time, assuring her that Vanessa simply needed time to feel comfortable around the household staff, that her occasional coldness was likely just nervousness or unfamiliarity with domestic help. He had trusted his own judgment completely, confident in his ability to read people after years of high-stakes business negotiations. He had been catastrophically wrong. Detective Rebecca Torres, a sharp, composed woman assigned to the case, arrived at the hospital within the hour and immediately began coordinating with hospital security and the district attorney's office. She sat down with Ethan in the small waiting room, her notebook open, her expression professional but not unkind. "Mr. Cole, I know this is an incredibly difficult night," she said gently. "But I need you to walk me through everything you witnessed, as clearly and completely as you can remember it." Ethan recounted the scene in the supply room in painful, halting detail. The envelope of cash, Dr. Whitfield's hesitation, Vanessa's desperate confession about the $4 million and the poisoning. Detective Torres listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes, her expression growing increasingly serious as the full scope of the situation became apparent. "This is significantly more extensive than a simple domestic dispute," she said finally, closing her notebook. "We're looking at attempted bribery of a medical professional, deliberate administration of a controlled substance, and substantial financial fraud. Mr. Cole, I have to ask, do you have any reason to believe this might not be the first time Ms. Sinclair has done something like this?" Ethan hesitated, his mind spinning. "I honestly don't know. I never had any reason to suspect anything before tonight. We'll need full access to your business accounts and financial records for a complete forensic audit," Detective Torres continued. "Given what you've described and what Dr. Whitfield has corroborated, I strongly suspect we're going to find this runs deeper than a single trust fund." Meanwhile, inside Maria's hospital room, Maria had woken briefly, alerted by the commotion outside her door, and asked a passing nurse what exactly was happening. The nurse, uncertain how much information she was authorized to share, simply told her gently that there had been an incident, and that Ethan would explain everything once things settled down. When Ethan finally returned to Maria's bedside near midnight, exhausted and emotionally hollowed out, Maria studied his face carefully, recognizing immediately that something significant had shifted. "Tell me," she said quietly, her voice still weak but steady. "Whatever it is, Mijo, tell me." Ethan sat down heavily in the chair beside her bed, took her frail hand in both of his, and in a halting, broken voice, told her everything. The bribe he had witnessed, Vanessa's confession about the stolen money, the horrifying realization that she had deliberately poisoned the woman who had raised him. Maria listened in silence, her expression unreadable at first, processing information that confirmed suspicions she had carried quietly for weeks but had never dared fully voice. "I found the folder," she finally admitted softly. "Behind the bookshelf in her office. I photographed everything. I was planning to bring it to you once I had enough proof that you couldn't dismiss it." Ethan's eyes widened with a fresh wave of guilt and grief. "You knew. And you didn't tell me because you were afraid I wouldn't believe you." "I was afraid," Maria admitted honestly, "that she would simply deny everything, and that I would be the one who ended up losing my job, my reputation, everything I've built here over 20 years, while she remained exactly where she was, untouched and unaffected." Ethan felt a fresh surge of shame wash over him, understanding now, with painful clarity, how deeply unequal the balance of power and trust had been between Maria and Vanessa in his own household. How his blind trust in Vanessa had left the person who genuinely loved him most feeling powerless and unprotected. "That's going to change," Ethan said firmly, squeezing her hand gently. "Starting right now. I'm not just going to make sure Vanessa faces every consequence she deserves. I'm going to make sure something like this never happens again, to you or to anyone else in this house." Maria offered him a weak but genuine smile. "One thing at a time, Mijo. Right now, just help me get better. We'll figure out the rest together." As the investigation widened, Ethan discovered that Vanessa's lies went far deeper, and far further back, than anyone could have imagined. Over the following 2 weeks, while Maria remained under careful medical observation, the forensic financial audit into Vanessa's activities expanded rapidly, uncovering details that shocked even the seasoned investigators assigned to the case. Detective Torres and her team discovered that the $4 million trust fund Vanessa had confessed to was only the beginning. Working with forensic accountants, they traced a complex web of transfers stretching back nearly 18 months, moving money through several shell companies registered under names Ethan had never heard of, eventually funneling funds into private accounts in the Cayman Islands. More disturbing still, investigators uncovered records revealing that Vanessa Sinclair was not, in fact, her legal birth name. Court documents from Miami-Dade County revealed she had been born Vanessa Marie Kowalski, and had legally changed her name twice over the past decade. Once after a brief, quietly annulled marriage to a wealthy Florida real estate developer named Marcus Reyes, the very man Maria had overheard her speaking with on the phone that rainy Tuesday evening. Marcus Reyes, when contacted by investigators, reluctantly admitted that his relationship with Vanessa had ended in eerily similar circumstances. Unexplained financial discrepancies, a sudden and mysterious health scare involving his elderly mother who lived with them at the time, and Vanessa's abrupt disappearance from his life the moment suspicion began closing in, nearly $2 million lighter than before she'd entered it. "I should have reported it back then," Marcus admitted during his statement, clearly shaken by the realization that his own painful experience had repeated itself, potentially fatally, with someone else. "I was embarrassed. I didn't want people to know I'd been fooled so completely. Sorry. If I'd spoken up sooner, maybe this wouldn't have happened to your Maria." Ethan, upon learning this information from Detective Torres, felt a fresh wave of anger mixed with something more complicated. A strange, unsettling recognition that he wasn't Vanessa's first target, and that her carefully honed manipulation tactics had been refined and perfected across multiple victims over the course of nearly a decade. Meanwhile, back at the Cole estate, something unexpected began happening among the household staff. With Vanessa formally removed from the property and barred from returning by a court-issued protective order, employees who had quietly endured her cold, dismissive treatment for 2 years finally felt safe enough to speak openly. Antonio, the head chef, revealed that Vanessa had once threatened to have him fired simply for purchasing organic groceries she considered an unnecessary expense, despite Ethan's explicit instructions to prioritize quality regardless of cost. Diane, the head housekeeper, admitted that Vanessa had regularly criticized her accent behind closed doors, mocking the way she pronounced certain words during private conversations with Kelly, unaware that Diane had occasionally overheard fragments through thin office walls. Kelly herself, Vanessa's young personal assistant, eventually came forward voluntarily, overwhelmed with guilt and fear of potential legal consequences. In a tearful meeting with Detective Torres, Kelly admitted she had known about several of Vanessa's financial transfers, though she claimed she hadn't fully understood their illegal nature until much later, believing initially that she was simply helping manage routine wedding-related expenses. "She told me it was normal," Kelly explained, wiping tears from her eyes. "She said all wealthy couples combine and move money around before marriage, that it was just complicated tax planning. I didn't know about the poisoning until I saw it on the news like everyone else. I swear to you, I would never have helped with that." Detective Torres, while sympathetic to Kelly's apparent lack of direct involvement in the poisoning itself, made clear that her knowledge of the financial fraud, and her failure to report it despite growing suspicions, would still carry legal consequences, though likely far less severe than what Vanessa herself would face. Ethan, absorbing each new revelation with a mixture of exhaustion and quiet devastation, found himself increasingly grateful for one thing amid the chaos: Maria's slow but steady recovery. Dr. Whitfield, who had fully cooperated with investigators from the moment Ethan discovered the bribe attempt, adjusted Maria's treatment plan carefully, gradually flushing the sedative from her system while closely monitoring her kidney function and blood pressure. "She's responding well," Dr. Whitfield reported during one of Ethan's daily visits, genuine relief evident in his voice. "Given what her body has been through, I'm cautiously optimistic about a full recovery. It'll take time, but she's a fighter." Ethan visited Maria every single day without exception, often bringing sunflowers instead of the elegant lilies Vanessa always chose for photographs, because Maria had once mentioned years earlier that sunflowers reminded her of the small garden behind her childhood home in Puerto Rico. He sat by her bedside for hours, sometimes discussing nothing important at all, simply grateful, moment by moment, that she was still alive to talk to him. "You should be resting your voice, not sitting here worrying about me constantly," Maria scolded gently during one visit, her strength slowly, steadily returning with each passing day. "I almost lost you," Ethan said quietly, guilt still heavy in his chest. "And I didn't even understand why, not really, until it was almost too late. I failed to protect you the way you've protected me for 20 years. Maria squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "You didn't do this to me, Mijo." "She did. Don't you dare carry her guilt on your shoulders. That belongs to her, and her alone." As Vanessa awaited trial, Ethan faced an unexpected test of his own character, one that would reveal exactly who he had become. While the criminal case against Vanessa moved slowly through the legal system, Ethan found himself confronting an entirely different kind of challenge: rebuilding trust, both within his household and within himself. The media coverage had been relentless since the story broke. Billionaire's fiancée arrested for poisoning family housekeeper dominated headlines for nearly a week, and Ethan's name, previously associated primarily with satellite technology and business innovation, suddenly became attached to scandal and tabloid speculation. Photographers camped outside the Cole estate's front gates for days, hoping to capture any usable image. Ethan's board of directors, concerned about potential damage to Cole Aerospace Technologies' public reputation, urged him to issue a carefully worded statement distancing the company from his personal life and minimizing further media attention. His public relations team drafted several versions, each one polished, professional, and emotionally sterile. Ethan rejected every single draft. "I'm not going to hide from this," he told his communications director during a tense meeting in his New York office. "Maria almost died. I'm not going to pretend this is just an inconvenient news cycle to manage. If people want to judge me for trusting the wrong person, that's their right. But I won't erase what happened to protect the company's image." Instead, Ethan gave a brief, unscripted statement to a small group of reporters gathered outside the courthouse after one of Vanessa's preliminary hearings. "I built my company from nothing because I believed hard work and honesty mattered more than shortcuts," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion visible beneath his eyes. "I was deceived by someone I trusted completely, and someone I love very much was nearly killed because of her greed. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking people to remember that real character is revealed not by how much wealth you accumulate, but by how you treat people who have no power over your life." The statement, unpolished and genuinely emotional, resonated far beyond what any prepared press release could have accomplished. Clips of Ethan's brief remarks circulated widely online, drawing an outpouring of public support, not just for Ethan, but especially for Maria, whose story of quiet loyalty and near-fatal betrayal captured national attention. Meanwhile, Dr. Whitfield faced his own difficult reckoning. The hospital's ethics board launched a formal investigation into his brief hesitation regarding Vanessa's bribe attempt, and for several tense weeks, his medical license hung in uncertain balance. Dr. Whitfield fully cooperated throughout the process, voluntarily surrendering the untouched envelope of cash to investigators and providing detailed testimony about the exact sequence of events. Ultimately, the ethics board concluded that while Dr. Whitfield's momentary hesitation had been troubling, his immediate refusal to accept the bribe and his complete cooperation with authorities demonstrated sufficient professional integrity to retain his license, accompanied by a formal reprimand and mandatory ethics retraining. Dr. Whitfield requested a private meeting with Ethan shortly after the ethics board's decision, arriving at the Cole estate visibly nervous, clearly anticipating anger or resentment. "I hesitated," Dr. Whitfield admitted immediately, shame heavy in his voice as they sat together in Ethan's study. "For one moment standing in that supply room, I actually considered taking that money. I'm not proud of that. I have no excuse that adequately explains it." Ethan studied him for a long, quiet moment, weighing his response carefully. "But you didn't take it," he finally said. "And the moment it mattered most, you told the truth, even though it put your own career at risk. People aren't perfect, Doctor. None of us are. What actually matters is what we choose to do when it's hardest to choose correctly. You chose correctly even after hesitating. That counts for something significant in my book." It was a lesson Ethan found himself repeating internally, almost like a mantra, as he worked through his own complicated feelings about the past 2 years, about the version of himself who had been so easily deceived, so willing to overlook warning signs simply because Vanessa's affection felt good, felt validating, felt like exactly what he'd been searching for after years of loneliness at the top of his company. Amid the legal proceedings and media scrutiny, something unexpectedly beautiful continued growing within the Cole household. Ethan began spending significantly more time simply present with his staff, not merely as their wealthy employer issuing instructions, but as someone genuinely interested in their lives, their families, their perspectives. He started hosting weekly dinners with Maria, gradually including her daughter Rosa and her 2 young grandchildren once Maria felt strong enough for visitors, learning details about their lives he'd never taken the time to ask about during his engagement to Vanessa. He discovered that Maria's grandson, an energetic 8-year-old named Diego, was fascinated by space and satellites, and Ethan began bringing him small models and educational books during visits, delighting in the boy's genuine excitement. "You know," Maria told him one evening, watching him laugh warmly with Diego over a card game at her kitchen table, "this is the happiest I've seen you look in years, Mijo. Genuinely happy, not just successful." Ethan smiled, and for the first time since the hospital nightmare began, it reached his eyes completely unguarded. "Maybe some things really are worth infinitely more than money," he said softly. "I think I finally understand that now, in a way I never fully appreciated before." As the trial date approached, Vanessa made one final, desperate attempt to escape the consequences of her choices, and it would reveal just how far she was willing to go. 3 weeks before Vanessa's trial was scheduled to begin, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from his lead attorney, Patricia Nguyen, her voice tight with urgency. "Ethan, you need to come to my office immediately," Patricia said. "Vanessa's legal team has filed a countersuit. They're claiming defamation, emotional distress, and breach of a prenuptial agreement you allegedly signed 6 months ago." Ethan's stomach dropped. "I never signed any prenuptial agreement with Vanessa. We discussed it briefly, but we never finalized anything." When Ethan arrived at Patricia's office an hour later, she showed him the document Vanessa's legal team had submitted, a prenuptial agreement bearing what appeared to be Ethan's signature, dated 6 months earlier, containing provisions that would have guaranteed Vanessa a minimum settlement of $15 million in the event of any separation, regardless of circumstances. Ethan stared at the signature in disbelief. "That's not my signature. I've never seen this document in my life." Patricia nodded grimly. That's what I suspected. We're bringing in a forensic document examiner immediately to compare it against verified samples of your actual signature. Given everything else we've uncovered about Vanessa's pattern of behavior, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a forgery. Possibly created using digital signature manipulation software, or even a skilled forger she's used before with previous targets. The forensic examination, completed within days, confirmed exactly what Patricia had suspected. The signature was a sophisticated forgery, created using software capable of replicating signature patterns from scanned documents Ethan had signed for entirely unrelated business purposes. Detective Torres, informed immediately of this development, added forgery and attempted fraud to the growing list of charges against Vanessa. "This woman doesn't stop," Detective Torres told Ethan during a follow-up meeting. "Even facing existing charges for poisoning and financial fraud, she's still actively trying to manipulate the system for personal gain. I've seen manipulative behavior before, Mr. Cole, but this level of persistent deception is genuinely remarkable, in the worst possible sense." Vanessa's own defense attorney, upon learning about the forgery discovery from opposing counsel, reportedly urged her strongly to abandon the countersuit immediately, recognizing it would only strengthen the prosecution's case and damage any possibility of leniency during sentencing. Vanessa, according to court filings, resisted this advice for nearly a week before finally, reluctantly withdrawing the countersuit. Meanwhile, Maria's recovery continued steadily, and Dr. Whitfield cleared her for full discharge from ongoing medical monitoring, transitioning her care to routine outpatient follow-ups. The day Maria finally returned home to the small guest cottage on the Cole estate where she had lived for nearly 15 years, Ethan organized a small, heartfelt gathering to celebrate. Nothing extravagant, just close household staff, Maria's daughter Rosa and her grandchildren, and a simple homemade cake that Antonio insisted on baking personally. "Welcome home," Ethan said warmly, embracing Maria carefully as she stepped through her front door for the first time in nearly 2 months. "It's good to be home," Maria replied, her voice thick with emotion, glancing around at the familiar cottage she had feared, during her darkest moments in the hospital, she might never see again. That evening, as the small celebration wound down, Maria pulled Ethan aside privately, her expression thoughtful and serious. "I need to ask you something, Mijo," she said carefully. "And I want you to think honestly before you answer. Course. Anything. Do you regret trusting her? Do you regret the past 2 years, given everything that's happened?" Ethan considered the question seriously, taking his time before responding. "I regret not listening to your warning sooner. I regret being so eager for love that I ignored signs I should have questioned. But I don't regret learning this lesson, painful as it's been. I think I needed to understand, in the clearest possible way, what real loyalty and real love actually look like, versus what a convincing performance of those things looks like. You taught me that difference, Maria. Not through lecturing me, but simply by being exactly who you've always been, even when it cost you everything." Maria's eyes glistened with tears, though she smiled warmly despite them. "Then perhaps something good came from all of this after all." "Something very good," Ethan agreed quietly. "Though I certainly wish it hadn't nearly cost you your life to teach me." 6 months after the poisoning, Ethan Cole stood in a courtroom, ready to face the woman who almost destroyed everything he loved. The courtroom was packed the day of Vanessa Sinclair's sentencing hearing, reporters lining the hallway outside, cameras flashing rhythmically as she was led in wearing a plain gray suit instead of the designer silk she'd once favored for public appearances. Her once perfect hair had been pulled back into a simple, unremarkable style, and she looked noticeably smaller somehow, stripped completely of the practiced glamour that had once made her seem untouchable. Ethan sat in the front row beside Maria, who had insisted on attending despite her family's lingering concerns about the emotional toll it might take on her still recovering health. "I need to look her directly in the eyes," Maria had said firmly during their conversation the previous evening. "I need her to see with her own eyes that I survived what she tried to do to me." The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Alvarado, reviewed the extensive case thoroughly before delivering her decision. Attempted bribery of a medical professional, deliberate administration of harmful substances to another person, extensive financial fraud spanning nearly 18 months, falsified identity documents used to conceal a previous undisclosed marriage, and attempted forgery of legal documents during ongoing criminal proceedings. The evidence, gathered meticulously by Detective Torres and her team, corroborated thoroughly by Maria's carefully documented notebook, Dr. Whitfield's honest testimony, Marcus Reyes's statement about his eerily similar prior experience, and comprehensive forensic accounting records tracing every fraudulent transfer, proved overwhelming and largely uncontested by Vanessa's own defense team. When given the opportunity to address the court directly, Vanessa turned slowly toward Ethan and Maria. Her eyes glassy with what appeared to be genuine emotion for what may have been the first time throughout the entire ordeal. "I know I don't deserve any forgiveness," she said, her voice quiet but audible throughout the silent courtroom. "I know that money can never undo what I did, or fix the damage I caused. I grew up with absolutely nothing, and somewhere along the way I promised myself I would never feel powerless again. That promise gradually turned me into someone I genuinely don't recognize anymore when I look in the mirror." She paused, glancing briefly at Maria before continuing. "Maria, I am truly sorry for what I did to you. There's no excuse that adequately explains it, and I don't expect you to ever forgive me. But I am sorry more than words can properly express." Ethan listened quietly to her statement, feeling an unexpected, complicated emotion settle over him. Not hatred exactly, but a strange, distant kind of pity for whoever Vanessa might have become under entirely different circumstances, a life not shaped by whatever early trauma had convinced her that manipulation was safer than genuine vulnerability. Judge Alvarado ultimately sentenced Vanessa to 8 years in state prison for aggravated assault, financial fraud, attempted bribery and forgery, along with a comprehensive court order requiring full repayment of every dollar stolen from Cole Aerospace Technologies, to be enforced through seized assets and future wage garnishment upon her eventual release. As Vanessa was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she looked back one final time toward Ethan. "I hope you find real happiness eventually," she said quietly. "I did love you, Ethan, in whatever broken, complicated way I was capable of loving anyone." Ethan simply nodded once, offering neither forgiveness nor further anger, just quiet, necessary closure. Outside the courthouse steps, reporters swarmed immediately, shouting overlapping questions. "Mr. Cole, what's next for you? Will you speak publicly about everything that happened here today?" Ethan paused at the top of the courthouse steps, Maria standing proudly beside him. Her health now fully restored, her spirit visibly unbroken despite everything she had endured. "I want people to understand something important," Ethan said, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the crowd of reporters and cameras. "Wealth doesn't protect you from being deceived. Success doesn't make anyone immune to manipulation, no matter how experienced or intelligent you believe yourself to be. What actually protects you is surrounding yourself with people who genuinely love you for who you are, not for what you have or what you can provide them. Maria Alvarez taught me more about real love and true loyalty during 20 quiet years of caring for my family than anyone else ever has in my entire life. That's exactly the kind of person worth building a life around." A year later, the story of Ethan and Maria had transformed into something far greater than a scandal. It became a lesson shared across an entire country. 6 months after Vanessa's sentencing, Ethan established the Alvarez Family Foundation, a non-profit charitable organization dedicated to providing healthcare access, legal protection resources, and financial literacy education to domestic workers and their families across the country. Directly inspired by Maria's extraordinary strength, resilience, and quiet dignity throughout the entire ordeal, Maria herself, now fully recovered both physically and emotionally, agreed to become the foundation's honorary co-chair, initially hesitant about stepping into any kind of public role after decades of quiet, private service, but ultimately embracing the opportunity once she understood its potential impact. "If sharing what happened to me helps even one other person recognize manipulation and financial abuse before it's too late," Maria told Ethan during their initial planning discussions, "then everything I went through will have meant something important, beyond just my own suffering." Together, they began traveling periodically to hospitals, community centers, and workers' rights organizations across the country, sharing their story with domestic workers, caregivers, and household staff who often felt powerless within employer relationships built on significant imbalances of wealth and authority. Maria's message resonated deeply with audiences. Document everything, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never assume that speaking up will cost you more than staying silent ultimately will. The Foundation's first major initiative established a confidential reporting hotline specifically for domestic workers who suspected financial exploitation or abuse within wealthy households, connecting them with legal resources and protective services without fear of immediate job loss or retaliation. A resource that, within its first year alone, assisted over 300 individuals across several states. Dr. Whitfield, having completed his mandatory ethics retraining and fully retained his medical license, reached out to Ethan the following year, requesting to volunteer his medical expertise for the Foundation's healthcare initiatives. Ethan welcomed him without hesitation, recognizing that Dr. Whitfield's honest, if imperfect, response during the crisis had ultimately been part of what exposed Vanessa's crimes and saved Maria's life. As for Ethan's personal life, he took things deliberately, carefully slow. He didn't return to public dating for nearly a full year, instead focusing on rebuilding his relationship with his company, his staff and most importantly, his own sense of self-trust and judgment. When he eventually began seeing someone quietly, a pediatric nurse named Sarah he'd met through his Foundation's hospital outreach work, he insisted on keeping their relationship entirely private for months, deliberately avoiding any premature public attention or media speculation. Trust isn't about avoiding risk altogether, Ethan reflected during an interview nearly 2 years after the initial scandal, when a journalist finally asked whether he'd learned to trust again. It's about learning to genuinely recognize authentic kindness when you actually see it, rather than being seduced by a convincing performance of it. I finally understand that difference now, in a way I never fully appreciated before everything that happened. Maria continued living in her small cottage on the Cole estate, now surrounded by an even larger extended family as Diego grew older, developing an increasingly serious passion for astronomy that Ethan continued nurturing with genuine enthusiasm, eventually helping the teenager secure a coveted summer internship at Cole Aerospace Technologies research facility. "You gave that boy his first telescope," Maria reminded Ethan warmly one evening, watching Diego excitedly explain orbital mechanics to a slightly overwhelmed but genuinely interested Antonio during a family dinner. "Now look at him. Look at everything that's grown from that one small gesture. Maybe that's really what genuine legacy looks like," Ethan replied thoughtfully, watching the scene unfold with quiet contentment. "Not the size of your bank account, but the people whose lives you've genuinely touched along the way, and the values you've helped instill in the next generation." The story of Maria Alvarez and Ethan Cole eventually transcended its origins as tabloid scandal, becoming instead a widely shared example, discussed across dinner tables, workplace break rooms, and social media comment sections throughout the country. That true wealth isn't measured in bank account balances or luxury possessions, but in the character of the people who remain standing beside you when everything else falls apart. Because in the end, unchecked greed had built Vanessa Sinclair's entire elaborate world of deception. But genuine honesty, unwavering loyalty, and authentic love ultimately built something far stronger and infinitely more lasting in Ethan Cole's life, a foundation no amount of stolen money could ever have purchased. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that honesty and loyalty always triumph in the end, and subscribe for more emotional, inspirational stories just like this one. Drop a comment below and tell us, which part of this story affected you the most deeply? We genuinely read every single comment, and we can't wait to hear your thoughts and reactions. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next story.